I want us to open our Bibles to John chapter number 20 as our starting point today. We have just now begun talking about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We know that his body had been laid in the tomb late in the afternoon of Friday, the 14th day of the first month of the Jewish calendar, the day on which the Passover lambs had to be killed. So he prophetically fulfilled that. Then they were intending, when they did that, to come back on Sunday morning to finish their funeral preparations for him. On Saturday, the Sabbath day, we know that the Jewish leadership went to Pilate and got a Roman guard from him because they were concerned that the apostles might steal the body and claim Jesus had been resurrected on the third day like he said he was going to be. Well, on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, there was an earthquake because an angel of the Lord came down and rolled that stone away and sat on it. And in the process, he frightened a whole squad of Roman soldiers right into a dead faint. And then they woke up and hightailed it for town. And then, while the light is starting to come on the horizon, the ladies began their trek from wherever it was they were resting and sleeping to the garden tomb, where they intended to finish their funeral for Jesus. And as they were walking, and it was getting very close to the tomb and very close to sunrise, they talked to each other about, well, who's going to push that great big stone aside for us? It's monstrous. And then they came up over a rise, apparently, or came around a bend, and there was the open tomb. They didn't see any angel. The angel that had been sitting on that tomb, that stone was now gone. But they rushed up to the tomb and entered in. And that's where I want us to pick up our story in John chapter 19, verse 1, which focuses specifically on Mary Magdalene. Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark. That's when she started out. And she saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Now, we know from other passages, such as Mark 16:5, that the ladies, Mary Magdalene among them, entered into the tomb. Luke specifically in his gospel, Luke 24:3, says that when they went into the tomb, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. Now, they did find the wrapping. Apparently, the linen cloth in which Jesus had been wrapped with some of the preparatory materials had just simply collapsed. His body disappeared out of it. And they saw that, but they knew that the body was not inside there. And Luke goes on to say that they were perplexed about this. Now, the angels have still not shown up. And this is the moment at which Mary Magdalene jumps to the conclusion about something and rushes off. John chapter 20 again, verse 2. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. That would be John the Apostle, the author of this gospel. And she said to them, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb. We don't know where they've laid him." So she, all on her own, assumed body theft and ran off from the other ladies. So while she was on her way, After she maybe got over the rise, maybe after she went around the curve, she was out of sight of the tomb. That's when the next part of the story happens for the ladies, minus Mary Magdalene. Luke 24:4. While they were perplexed about this, behold, two men stood by them in dazzling apparel. Now, don't get distracted by the stood by them. The wording for stood by in Greek basically means positioned there. So when we read in Mark's account, we have something a little bit more specific. Mark 16:5. Entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe. Now, when you go into the Garden Tomb at Jerusalem, the one I prefer to think of as being the site of Jesus' tomb, the preparation area for the bodies, the places where you would lay the bodies and let them kind of decompose over the next year, those are actually to the right side of the entrance door. And so that kind of matches what we're seeing here. There's two of them. Mark only focuses on one of them. Apparently, they were positioned one at the head and one at the feet. Now, Mark's account again. Entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. Now, I would have to say that's got to be an understatement. If you were standing inside of a tomb, wondering where in the world did the body of my master, my Lord, go, and suddenly there were two glowing individuals in the room with you, just sitting there, sitting at the foot and the head of where the body should have been, at the top and the bottom of the collapsed cocoon, if you will, the collapsed material, fabric, where the body should have been. I would panic too. I would be down on my face, just like these ladies were. This is Luke 24:5. They were frightened and they bowed their faces to the ground. So they were down flat in the area inside. Again, if it really is the authentic tomb, this tomb in the garden in Jerusalem has this visitation alcove to the left side of the door. When we visit there, we can usually get 3 or 4 or 5 people in there comfortably with no problem. So if these ladies were all in there and fallen down on their faces, that would have been pretty crowded. But it could have been done. Now, what does the angel say? The spokesperson angel. Well, we've got 4 accounts of what the angels say, 3 on this particular occasion. So let's read them all. We're already in Luke, so let's read that one first. Luke 45:5. The men said to them, because these angels look like humans, they look like men, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified and on the 3rd day rise?" So that is the reminder to them that they should have expected this, that Jesus should never have been expected to be found here on this 3rd day. In fact, he had told them that he was going to see them next after his death in Galilee. Matthew 28 verse 5. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid." That's always a nice first address from an angel, isn't it? Especially when you are scared to death and you're down on your face. For I know that you seek Jesus who is crucified. So I know who you're looking for. Why? Verse number 6 says, He is not here, for he is risen as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. This is Mark chapter 16, verse 6. He said to them, Do not be alarmed, so don't be frightened. You seek Jesus of Nazareth who is crucified. That's a statement of fact. He is risen, he is not here. See the place where they laid him. So the angels are basically trying to calm the ladies down from being scared by their presence and trying to remind them, look, you're not going to find him here because he told you that today he would be resurrected. In fact, he told you where you would see him next. And that's where Mark's gospel goes next. And remember, Mark's gospel seems to be a collection of Peter's preaching, Peter's sermons. So here's a little focus for Peter. Verse number 7 of Mark 16. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Matthew's account, Matthew 28:7. Then go quickly, tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead. Behold, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. See, I've told you. So in all of these accounts, the ladies are calmed. They are affirmed in the fact that they are looking for the dead body of Jesus, and he's not there because he's resurrected already. The tomb was not opened up so Jesus could escape. It was opened up so the ladies could find it empty. Jesus just, I don't know how to express it, just came out of the grave clothes without disturbing them. He just came out of that shell and was resurrected, left nothing but emptiness. And so the ladies are being told, you can even look here. Come, check the place out. You can see the empty grave clothes right here. Now, remember, he told you ahead of time that this was the way it was going to play out. He didn't just tell the disciples. He was telling the ladies as well. He's going to go to Jerusalem, going to be crucified, but he will resurrect on the third day, and he would meet them in Galilee at a very specific place. So the next thing that the ladies are told is, take this message to Peter, to the other apostles, that they need to start out for Galilee because that's where he told them to meet him. So let's make this very plain. Jesus did not originally have an intention of making resurrection appearances at Jerusalem. He was planning that the disciples would leave on this first day of the week morning and make their way to a specific mountainside in Galilee where he would appear to them. My suspicion is that that mountainside was a reference to the place where he had appointed them as apostles, just a mile or so north and west of Capernaum. The reason we have Jerusalem appearances is because they're not believing about the resurrection, and they have to be knocked out of that disbelief. Now, Mark's gospel says this, Mark 16:8. They went out, the ladies went out, and they fled from the tomb. for trembling and astonishment had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. So it scared them crazily to have seen these angels and been told this message. Now, from my perspective, that is where the authentic Gospel of Mark ends. I don't know where the authentic ending originally was, because we've got bits and pieces and fragments that claim that they are the ending of Mark. The longest one that appears in most Bibles, but always, I can't say always, in most cases with a footnote, continues through verse 20. But I don't accept that as authentic. For one thing, it says that the apostles in the upper room did not believe the story of the two men coming back from Emmaus. But when you read that story in Luke, which is not in dispute, is definitely the inspired word, it doesn't say that the men in the upper room disbelieved. It actually says they were already telling the story about Jesus appearing to Peter by that time. So they seem to be in belief, at least for the most part. So from my standpoint, that's problematic. It's not just that, though. Those last few verses in most English Bibles for the book of Mark are not found in the oldest copies in Greek. It's not found in most of the oldest translations in other languages. And not just that, I can tell you from personal experience, because I've just recently been translating from the Gospel of Mark. As soon as you get to verse number 9 of this chapter, you suddenly have a whole bunch of vocabulary and grammar that is not like Mark earlier. It does not seem to match the stylistic portions that came earlier. And so I'm sorry for those of you that feel strongly about your King James Version and things like that, but I don't believe that we should be promoting things that don't appear to be authentic to the original Mark text. So I never, ever, ever teach from the next few verses. There's plenty of other inspired parts that tell that next part of the story. And that's where we're going to focus our attention from here on out. If you got questions about any of this, please contact me. I'll be more than happy to engage you in a polite forum. Okay? Matthew chapter number 28, verse 8. So they, meaning the ladies, departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy. So that matches what we read in Mark chapter 16, verse 8. They were scared, but here we're told that they were also kind of excited. And then eventually, I don't think right off the bat, eventually they ran to tell his disciples about this. One more passage before we move on. In Luke 24, verse number 8, it says, they remembered his words, that is Jesus' words about rising from the dead, meeting them in Galilee, and returning from the tomb. So they leave the tomb with the intention of going and talking to the apostles about this. And then it lists their names here in verse number 10. They were Mary Magdalene. Now, she's already on her way back. Her story is a little bit different than the ladies that we've been talking about today. Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, that's Mary, the mother of Jesus, I believe, and the other women with them. So those ladies are now out of the tomb, and they're getting ready to go and talk to the apostles. But while they're on their way, let's talk about what was going on with the Mary Magdalene story. We already mentioned that she ran off to Peter and John and told them how the body had been stolen. That was her assumption. John chapter 20, which is the only one that really tells Mary Magdalene's story in full. John 20, verse 3 says, "So Peter went out with the other disciple, and they were going toward the tomb." So this would be probably right around the same time that the ladies have already left the tomb area. Both of them were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. So John was faster of foot, apparently. Some people suggested he was younger. That doesn't necessarily guarantee he's going to be faster. But Peter gets to the tomb first, but he doesn't go in. John gets to the tomb first, but he doesn't go in. Verse 5 tells us that. "And stooping to look in, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he did not go in." So he stops at the entrance of the tomb and looks in. And you can do this at the tomb that I've been describing to you. You can look right into the area where the body would have been. And what does John see? He sees flattened clothing. The shell that's collapsed where Jesus' body had been, Friday afternoon when they closed the tomb. So he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth, which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Now, I'm always of two minds on what this face cloth is. Some people think that it was a simple piece of cloth that the people put over the face of the deceased so they wouldn't have to look at his face while they were doing the preparations. And typically, they covered it with the other wrappings so that it would have been on the inside of the shell. It would have been on the inside of the funerary cocoon, if you will. So when John sees it folded up lying by itself somewhere else, it's like, well, how did that get out? Because the others just collapsed. Others think that it might be the chin strap. When a person's body relaxes after death, the mouth tends to drop open. So in some places, they will take a little rolled up piece of cloth and they'll put it underneath the chin and then tie it up behind the back of the head so the mouth will remain closed. And so some people think that's what he was referring to, seeing it somewhere else. So how did that happen? Because it should have been on the inside of the shell. So he sees that by itself and the flattened cloth. And verse 8, "Then the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed." So Peter and John see all of this, and they're shocked by it. And then at least John says, "That's when I started believing, when I saw that empty tomb with the clothing there." Verse number 9, he offers this testimony freely. "For as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead." And then the disciples went back to their homes. So John and Peter at some point see the empty tomb, the empty grave clothes, but they don't see Jesus. And after that experience, they go back home. Now, the stories that we will be focusing on next session as we begin a new week are going to deal with the first time Mary Magdalene sees Jesus alive. That's here in John. And then the first time the ladies in their little group, minus Mary Magdalene, see Jesus alive. Let me read to you just the beginning of what we will talk about starting next session. This is from Matthew 28:9. "Behold, Jesus met them." That is, the ladies that were on their way from the tomb to find the apostles. "Greetings," he said. Shalom, probably. "And they came up and they took hold of his feet and they worshiped him." So they got down on their hands and knees and wrapped their arms around his feet because they were so excited to see him alive, just like they'd been told. And Jesus said to them, "Don't be afraid. You go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." So once again, we have this emphasis that the apostles are not supposed to be hanging around Jerusalem expecting to see Jesus. They're actually supposed to start walking back to Galilee because that's where he wanted to meet them in his resurrected form.